as risk professionals, we needed to be so agile and flexible. We needed to change the way that we operate and also change the way that our people, our staff operate as well. Not always realizing, I think, what, the new risks that would be involved here, or the nuances that would come in from this, and also the longevity of time, and how we have now come into this world of a difference, this new normal. I hate calling it that, but this is our world now. And things are not going to go back to how they were. We are finding hybrid models. We find that many teams are working effectively at home. And so, you don't see full capacity in offices and so on anymore. But it has come with that nuance of, but with things being so different, it's pulled in a completely dynamic, new dynamic, a different dynamic that one had maybe not thought about for our landscape of work in terms of people. And so this HR blind spot is something I think that so many organizations have had to have a look at in terms of, the risks around our people, the way we operate. We look at how are they operating effectively? What is impacting the teams, the staff? What is that landscape looking like? And I think so today is just, it's something that so that we've been talking about quite a bit. Never mind, in terms of our operating model, in terms of how we are currently working, what we've needed to do in the last year, and seeing that in 2021 that we're carrying on like we were, and it's working effectively. But it comes with so many other things, and I think that's what we're here today to talk about. So thank you for joining us. We've got a lovely turnout, a fantastic program. I'm delighted. We have Peter Links from Marsh with us, and I'm going to hand over to him in about 5 minutes. I just want to chat about a couple of things before we get going, but Peter is going to be facilitating, and many of you know Peter from the road shows that we did over the last few years, where we go around the country and come and have breakfast with you and have our discussions, and we are completely missing that. And so hopefully we will get back to that though, because although this digital platform has been fantastic, and we're loving how we're able to pull everyone in from all over the show, I mean, it's really pulled us closer. We are really missing that human interaction. So the way the team are also planning ahead is looking at the hybrid models of how we can get to the different venues, because we're missing visiting our Cape Town, East London, Limpopo, our Durban. We had plans to go to the other provinces, and so we're just not seeing the people. We're not seeing the people in Gauteng either. But hopefully we'll get back to that, later on in the year or early next year, and then pull in that hybrid model that we're still able to connect everybody. But those are the plans, and that this events and marketing team are incredibly dynamic and innovative. So I know they've got big plans as well. So Peter, hopefully as well, you're going to soon be on a roadshow again with Marsh and UMSA at some point, and able to go and have the fun that comes with that roadshow and that learning and collaboration and networking. I think that's what we're missing. But just quickly, before we hand over, I know many of you thinking, oh, what's Gillian doing here? And Peter and I were laughing at this morning, because it is, I am no longer the CEO, I'm the acting CEO, and we're waiting now for our new dynamic CEO to be joining us. But it does feel like I haven't gone anywhere. So we were having a little bit of a chuckle in terms of I'm still very much part of UMSA at UMSA, part of our awesome team. So you're still going to be seeing me for a little bit of time, and then obviously engaging with you as we go along for the rest of the year in other projects and so on. So I'm still very much around and happy to be so. But now, with regards to this week, I need to tell you about this week, guys. It's been busy. This team has been so busy. We launched our mentorship program about a week ago, and yesterday we had our mentorship event. So congrats to the mentees that were selected. And then we've got our mentors. Thank you for your commitment to our members. I mean, it really is fantastic. So yesterday they had their opening event, and if you're not part of the program, please look out for the next program for the mentorship programs that will come up later in the year. And so that happened yesterday. We had the Cura software series event yesterday as well, and that was really fantastic. These software series are really great at the moment in terms of what we're able to show our members in terms of the various softwares that we've had. I mean, I think that was the third or fourth one we had yesterday, and they're really working well. Just if you've missed any of the software series, just to let you know that they are recorded, so you are able to go onto our channel on YouTube and go back and watch them, because they really are fantastic. And then and then we've got today. I mean, I'm not sure if my team is just crazy or if they're just overly enthusiastic that they want to do so much. But guys, well done for putting so much together for this week and for our members. I think it just adds huge value, especially with the topics and the interactions that we're having. Just one thing, and I think it's important coming up. We've got an event coming up. You'll see on the 8th of June. It went out on one of the webinar, like, save the dates, and you'll see more information going out. And our team put this together, and it's a late sort of event that is going to be published, but for POPIA. And I know we've had many members reaching out to us around POPIA and the regulations, and are we all ready? And so the events team will be sending out information about that on the 8th of June. Very, very important. And then, of course, for our CROs, the 30th of June, we will be having that CRO forum. So please pop that into your diaries. And it is obviously for the head of risk or CRO only. So it's one of those prestigious events. And then board exams. So I've had quite a few people chatting to me lately about the board exams coming up. And obviously, CRM Prac is in June. So if you're considering your CRM Prac exam, which is board exam 1, you're too late for June. But the good news is that you're not too late for the November exam for CRM Prac. And registration is open, and you can register for that one until the 9th of July. Get your registration done, have a look at what you need to do, and now is the time to step up. And likewise with the CRM Prof, which is board exam 2, which again speaks to those CROs, heads of risk, etc., that have got that wealth of experience behind them. Again, what are you doing this year to get that CRM Prof designation, those letters behind your name? And registration for that is open for the October exam and will be until the 2nd of July. But please start having discussions with us, because once we get going from that 2nd of July, it really is a very busy and active month. Well, a couple of months before October, preparing for those exams. And then, of course, if you are at that CRM Prof CRO level, you might be able to, and you haven't done board exam 1, which is the CRM Prac, you might meet the criteria to actually have exemption from board exam 1. So that's a very important discussion to have with Portia. So Portia is our lead for board exams for professionalization, and she is the one with all the information. So if you need to find out if you are able to apply and meet the criteria for exemption, please have a discussion, because then you can go straight to that board exam too. And so something to keep in your diaries, please, are those 2 exams, and very important in terms of that step up and creating that credibility for yourself as a risk professional. And then the last thing I want to share with you is our training. The training, continues. Our training online program continues, but on the 8th of July, we're going to be having our first hybrid training. So it's really amazing what the team have put together. They've been very crafty. Yesterday, I saw in our training room in Sandton at the UMSA offices, we looked at how we've got TV screens, cameras, we've got mics, we've got our own little mics that clip on. I mean, never before have we had that. We've always had technical teams, and Kobus and the training and marketing team have been really phenomenal in terms of how we're setting up our hybrid training. So with our hybrid training, you'll be able to be in the offices at UMSA and sit there if you want to be in that classroom, or you will be at home, but you'll be hosted by someone who will be your voice. So it's going to be really fun, and we're playing with it, and it's a model that we are growing and going to completely just constantly evolve. And I think it's something you guys are going to enjoy. I'm really looking forward to it as myself. So if you are interested, that 8th of July, Risk, Appetite and Tolerance is the first hybrid training that we will be doing. So excited about it. And then, of course, we've got certain hybrid models lined up for our conference late in the year at the end of September. And that's also going to be done a little bit differently, different from a hybrid model, but having people in different venues and so on across the country. And I think that's going to be very, very exciting. So I can't wait to see what we've got planned for that one. But now let me hand over to you because we can talk. There's so much planned for the year. This team is very busy. But Peter, I'm going to hand over to you because I think, I'm really looking forward to, we've got Beauty from ABSA, Corsi, who used to be from Nedbank as an independent consultant now, and Tamara and Tisantha from Mercer. And I think, just looking at the topics of what they're going to discuss today, really, really so pertinent to what we're faced with at the moment and dealing with.
Yes, Jill, thanks so much for having me, and good morning to everyone. It's such a pleasure to be within this community. What I love about UMSA is we solve these challenges together, and the people risk challenges are so nuanced, Jill. It was first just, let's get everyone home, let's get them safe. Then it was sort of like, let's get them laptops, and the complexity has just kept evolving. Let's look after mental health. What does this mean now for work from home policies? Does the HR systems facilitate this new world? So it's a massively complex risk, and so it's good to be here amongst friends to help resolve it together. And I agree with you. Our lineup is amazing.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for doing this. It's just so sad that we're not sitting at a room and having a good tackle cup of coffee and all the conversations that we normally have, Peter, and going around the country. I really do miss that, I must say.
Same. No, absolutely. And I've been fielding some questions already on the side, and let's all keep our people safe and do what's best for our organizations in this in-between time, in this hybrid time. And I think, I'm sure that one of the questions is going to be sort of like, how do you get people back to office, right? As an example, should they even be coming back to office? These are some of the complex policy type issues that we're going to need to resolve and help our leadership resolve as a risk community, but also as an HR leadership community. So very excited to be here, and I think let's apply our minds, let's ask the questions, right? Because we've got the right panel of experts to help us do that today.
No, absolutely. I think if the people can use, if our guests this morning can use the chat box, ask the questions and have the conversations. I mean, that's the other thing I'm missing is that, I think people sit quietly at home, I'm not going to ask the question, or it might not be seen or whatever. And so that interaction is missing sometimes. So I think I agree with you. But Peter, you're the right person to bring that energy and get people talking today. So let's go for it, Peter. And thank you. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Jill. And it's good to still have you around despite that email a few weeks ago.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, we'll chat later. Thank you very much.
We'll chat. Thanks, Jill. And good morning, everyone, again. And a special welcome to all our esteemed panelists. We really have made a concerted effort to get the right blend of skills in front of you today to really present both thought leadership, but also practical insights in terms of how we are going to manage this ever-evolving and increasingly complex risk I jokingly started off this journey for this webinar by saying, and I'm sure as a risk community you can relate, there was always that one risk on the risk register, right? Inability to attract and retain talent. It was the same risk almost in every corporate in South Africa, maybe with a bit of health and safety thrown in, but that risk has evolved massively and way beyond that single line item. So apply your mind, really put in the chat function the most difficult questions you've got, really the things that you and the leadership team are struggling with at the moment. Let's field the questions to the experts, and they are the right people to handle it. So I'm not going to wax on. I think we're going to get straight to it. Let me start by introducing our first speaker for today. It's Beauty Mtonga. She's a dynamic career lady with 29 years of successful work experience across the banking industry and financial services at the top global banks. She's currently a director and chief risk officer for People Risk. I thought that was interesting in and of itself, right? So Beauty is a chief risk officer for People Risk, specifically at ABSA Group Limited. She's also a member of our family here at UMSA, so she's an associate member of UMSA. She's also a board member of the Zambia South Africa Business Forum. So she's got that Pan-African exposure. And I think in her last role also was head of operational risks for apps across the continent. So really depth and breadth of experience in terms of risk, but now with a focus on people risk. Her accolades are numerous, and I won't get into them other than to say that she's the recipient of the Barclays Eagle Award, a very prestigious award. And I think testament to her deep insights. So without further ado, let me hand over to the Chief Risk Officer for People Risk at ABSA, Beauty. Beauty, I'll help field questions. You've got a half an hour. I think we're timed until about 20 to 11, but the floor is yours. Please tell us about how you're experiencing this risk at the moment.
Thank you very much. and a warm welcome to everybody that has joined us today from across the world, not only in the African continent. So it's really exciting to be back on the EMSA platform. Some of you may have seen me previously, presenting and also being a facilitator on some of the programs. So it's exciting for me to be back here, and I hope everyone is as exciting as I am. I'm very passionate about people to start with, and therefore people risk is one of the areas that really I'm concerned about, and looking forward to chatting with you and engaging with you. I'm mindful also that there are other panelists, and I think it's a great team that has been put together. So thank you very much, EMSA, for this opportunity, and Peter, to you as well as the facilitator. Gillian did put me on the spot when she started. I hope my colorful background is not actually, going directly into people's eyes and causing confusion, but it's a deliberate move. We are in a situation where, the environment is not the way it was like 4 years ago. So one has to bring some excitement, much as we are discussing serious issues. So to start with, you may all have seen the topic we are looking at and discussing today, which is the HR blind spot. So we cannot talk about that blind spot without unpacking and understanding what people risk is. So people risk, in a nutshell, has been described by many scholars, organizations, schools of thought in different ways. But ultimately, we all are looking at the main key drivers that define people risk. So people risk are those risks that any organization and every, to actually sum it up, is exposed to by virtue of being an employer. So when you're an employer, you employ people to start with. We don't employ machines. And therefore, our people are our core and key assets that drives every organization. Time and again, we want to think, because we've got, we are digitizing, therefore the human aspect is moving further and further. Regardless to what extent the human aspect moves away, we cannot undermine or ignore the fact that a person will be needed to do something. Even if we have robots, an individual will still need to move that robot from one end to the other. So having said that, in a nutshell, in describing what people risk is, I'm going to unpack what actually builds into that people risk aspect. So as organizations, we are faced with a number of challenges because we employ people. We're looking at attraction to start with. For colleagues to come into the organization, they must get attracted to something. And the ways of work currently have actually heightened the focus on people risk. Peter did allude to the fact that changes are being seen, not because we want to deliberately, but because we are facing a situation whereby we need to move on and move on with time. So some of the key risks that actually impact on people risk relate to attraction. How we attract our people is important. And what is in the organization will actually lead to whether do we attract the right talent, the right capability or not. Retention is one of the risks that is actually underlying or overlaying the entire people risk landscape. Organizations should not only aim at bringing people, developing them, and seeing them go quickly. There must be a deliberate strategy that speaks to retaining our people within organizations. Retention is a key aspect as well of how we manage our people risk. Capability. We cannot just have people that are not capable. Again, that in itself brings in an element of risk. We want to ensure that the people we are bringing into organizations have the right skill set, have the capability to deliver on strategic objectives. Performance management underlines people risk as well. We need to ensure that our people are effectively developed. And once they are developed, we tend to see that they get to perform even better. Employee relations, I'm quickly just listing down the aspects or drivers that actually build into people risk. Employee relations, how we manage our people, is an important aspect. We cannot just say, get it right at attracting them, bringing them in, developing them, performance managing them. It can't work like that. How we treat our people is an important aspect of the entire employee value chain and life cycle. Capacity. That has been heightened now as well with the ways of work currently. Nobody anticipated that we will have, maybe, especially in South Africa, because outside of South Africa, especially in the rest of the African countries in the region, we still see quite a few people that are going to the office. Whereas in South Africa, a number of colleagues are still working from home, unless those that really need to be in the front line, like the healthcare workers, and have to be physically in the offices. So now, blind spots. By definition, a blind spot is that area in your vision that you can't really see. If you look at, you are driving, some people have caused accidents because, and the reason they'll say is that, oh, it was a blind spot. But in an organization, we cannot also just talk about blind spots without narrowing it down to our leadership. Our leaders are part of the core decision makers. They drive the strategy, they formulate all the strategies, but they too would have their blind spots. And those blind spots actually can contribute to people risk. An example, now it is anticipated that people are working from home, and by assumption, colleagues think because Peter or Beauty are working from home, therefore they have so much time on their hands to do everything in many hours' time. Whereas if we were in the office, we would specifically work, say, 8:30 to 4:30 or 8 to 5. But the assumption that we've got so much time at home becomes that blind spot, which is being overlooked. Sometimes it's unconsciously done, that workload is given to people whilst they are working at home. But that again creates risks in its own. And that's why I love this topic, because one item done leads to risk, and we cannot avoid risk. Risk is there to stay. We cannot be averse to it. We must actually see, how do we manage those risks that we face, especially the people risk, because we rely on people to drive business. We rely on people to execute. We rely on people to deliver. We ourselves, as people, are a core factor in any organization. So whilst we assume that people have got a lot of time to work from home, that has been seen as, in some areas, being invasive into our privacies. Sometimes you see meetings that are back to back. If we were in the office, as an example, would we be able to have those meetings back on back without a break? So the dynamics that we work in currently have introduced quite elevated risks. And amongst the people risk, which is heightened now, is employee well-being. There is a lot that is happening, as I have previously said, and I must apologize that I don't have slides. I normally prefer to speak off cuff than have slides. I think I find it more, engaging, and I hope you will engage with me in this fashion. So employee well-being is an elevated and heightened people risk currently. The pandemic has brought with it many, many different aspects as to the way we are working, the way we are living, the mental well-being of employees has actually been greatly impacted. If we are not affected by COVID personally, we are impacted because we live in a community, we live with families. So having to work and having to look at, your professional aspect as well as your personal responsibilities has brought in an element of challenge in many organizations. But the list could be, it's long. However, for me, what is important is how organizations deal with these particular risks. So it's looking at the risks, understanding the impact, developing strategies and controls, speaking in the risk language, that will mitigate the current risks and foreseeable risks. We didn't anticipate that we were going to have COVID wave 3. So we sort of prepared controls to manage and mitigate wave 2. Here comes wave 3. We don't know what whether there will be a wave 4. God forbid, we pray that we shouldn't have a wave 4 that's coming in. So how prepared have organizations been? And in managing risk, we need to look futuristic. We need to look ahead. How are we going to manage those risks that are yet to come on people risk? Because we can't avoid them, like I've said, but we need to manage them. Our leadership are a key aspect into looking at this. So from a blind spot perspective, if I come back to that piece, we have leaders who have biases, as an example. And that is a blind spot as well. Bringing in people, sometimes because we know somebody, we overlook the fact that it's beyond who you know, but it's about capability and being able to deliver. Where leaders don't have strategies, because you can't unpack these things if you don't analyze, review yourselves, review the organization to understand where are we getting it wrong? Where are we missing something in the value chain? Because you've got to look at the employee life cycle. So when you look at the people risks that are normally listed, it actually should speak to the employee life cycle from the time they come in to the time they leave, whichever way they leave, but we've got to look at that life cycle. The intention is to minimize as many risks. We can't eliminate, but we can minimize those people risks that are faced in any organization. And we, much as we are leaders, we are also employees. And we don't only want to leave the solution making to leaders, we've got to be part of the solution as well. Our policies, for instance, were drafted pre-COVID. Have companies gone back to relook those policies? Some have not. I can speak for APSA. It's relooked its policies. And if you recall, APSA won many awards in terms of how it managed the current pandemic in the organization. That didn't come overnight. That was concerted effort. There were a number of colleagues, a number of other specialist risk types that came in. And for me, that's part of the advice that, upfront, I would want to give to my colleagues who don't work for APSA, to say, when you're looking at these issues, don't look at it in isolation, because if you look at it in isolation, it will result in another risk. So what you do needs to be unpacked, needs to be looked at in terms of the broader view and not just internally focused. Because if you look at it internally, you will actually miss something. And that could be your blind spot, looking just internally. So you've got to have a mind that looks outwards. Policies are but documents. They are not necessarily a law that you can't change as things change. It's different when we look at legislation, because legislation has got to go through various stages before it is changed. But our policies need to be aligned with the current working environment to ensure that when we are employing people into the organization, how do we do it? For instance, in the past, before COVID, interviews were face-to-face. But currently, it's done via Zoom, it's done via Teams, it's gone digital. In the past, I mean, I find this quite interesting. There was an assumption that only the learned or educated people would use laptops to a large extent. But now, this thing has sort of turned around. Even people who don't have degrees can use a laptop, can work from home, because you need to continue to execute. So that is how the work life is changing. So how we are attracting people has changed. How we retain people is also changing with the dynamics. How we manage our people is changing with the current dynamics. And we've got to move along with change. An interesting aspect is, as things are changing, do we foresee them coming back to normal? And if they do, how are we going to handle that situation? The chances are slim that we will go back to where we were before COVID. Aspects of it might change, as in maybe people will go back for work after that, but some have adopted permanently to the new way of working, to the new normal, working from home. But that comes with its own challenges, having to deal with your life work as well as looking after the family. So the people risks are quite many, but I think the focus and drivers are the ones that I've listed, because those are thematic. No matter how people risk is described, whichever way, whichever country, whichever continent, we will still ultimately come up with the same key drivers that actually formulate people risk. So in terms of trying to understand further, remember, I did mention about the impact. What impact has this brought to our organization? Resilience is one other area, and the ability to adapt to change. That does not come cheap, because, for instance, who would have budgeted 1,000 laptops as an example? Because people had desktops, so now the cost for desktops is forgone. We're now looking at the cost for laptops, where people have to be able to work from home, and mainly because we can't go to the office. Some have used their desktops, they've brought it home, but to a large extent, there's a cost aspect of it that we've looked at. So our well-being is at the core of everything, because we need a healthy workforce. We need the right capacity. We need to retain the people that we have in the organization. We cannot just say HR, because when we talk about HR, we can sort of limit it. In my view, I think it should go beyond HR when we are talking about these blind spots. The HR strategies have also changed, and we've moved on with time in terms of how we relook and align with the current environment. Peter, I want to end there and take some questions, if that is okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Beauty, for sharing some of those insights, in particular for listing and talking us through the focus and drivers of change. What I loved was, we can't eliminate, but we can minimize risks, people risks, right? And in having these kinds of discussions, I think the idea is to open our minds up to some of the new complexities that we may not have thought about before. So, Beauty, I'm gonna pose a very challenging question, and this is from Levin Barzani, and it's around gender-based violence and how it's a terrible scourge on South Africa, to be honest. And the question is, how can employers protect employees who are working from home, since this is their new office, in the context of this unfortunate scourge of gender-based violence? And I know it's a difficult question, but I mean, what are you seeing? What have you found works in that space?
Thank you very much for that question. Very important. So what I found and seen that works is education, equipping and providing the tools for people to be able to speak up, to be able to reach out. Time and again, I think matters of violence, and naturally so, are sort of not talked about. So having the awareness to start with as an organization, and APSA has got programs and tools in place as an example that helps towards, addressing the issues of gender-based violence. There's ICAS, for instance, where people could phone in and talk about what they're experiencing. There are hotlines that can be used, okay? And even just a phone call to maybe a line leader or someone that is trustworthy that can help you. So it's knowing about what to do, who to contact, and how to go about, contacting those persons. So, yeah.
Thank you, Beauty. I mean, yeah, so Beauty just said, reiterating awareness, right? And that responsibility falls on all of us as risk practitioners, but also as first line managers, as line managers, to open up that kind of conversation around access to wellness programs. We had a global Mercer Marsh webinar 2 days ago on people risk, and one of the comments made by a global practitioner was that wellness programs are now a sanity check. They're not a nice to have, they are an absolute must do. So whether that's ICAS or whatever, it's generating awareness around those programs, because of course those are the professionals who can give the best advice. So thank you for reminding us of that. Yeah, and what I would say is, as first line, we mustn't obfuscate our responsibilities. I've received similar phone calls, which is I'm near exhaustion. You mentioned exhaustion earlier, right? And the boundaries are no longer being there, because people assume that you have extra hour, 2 hours that you would have been in traffic maybe now. Yeah. And I've had to sort of give the advice, but then say, actually, you have to call the ICAS or the wellness program equivalent, because this is bigger than sort of what I professionally can handle. So it's a great point. Beauty, a question from you.
And sorry, to your point, before you move on to the next question, I mean, you rightly point out the fact that employee well-being is now heightened focus, because unknowingly, the way we are working has led to burnout. It's led to fatigue. Previously, I think aspects of well-being only came in when someone said, I'm sick today, I've got a flu, or I've got to take care of a family. But now, you see, inherently, this is becoming heightened. And we've got to create that awareness to say people can take in so much, and some do it because they fear that if I don't execute, I will lose my job. Companies are closing down. So rather than lose my job, let me just continue to take in more and more and more. That's damaging to your health. We must be able to say, no, I think I can't cope. That doesn't mean you will be fired if you say you can't cope. Because at the end of the day, we have to be responsible employers to take care of our employee and colleague well-being. Thanks, Peter. I just thought I should come in on that quickly as well.
No, it's such an important point, because don't you think we've moved leaps and bounds as a business community in terms of understanding mental health and mental wellness, exhaustion, fatigue? I mean, these were not things we were really talking about, unless people got to the very end of that unfortunate cycle, which was sort of like mental nervous breakdowns, right? That was almost the only instance in which, but not on the day to day.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the question that I want to raise and ask the community here today is, what are your policies like at the moment? What I'm seeing, or what we're seeing, is clients moving to 45-minute maximum Zooms, right? Or no Zoom Fridays, no Zoom Wednesdays, and how do we as a risk community start to encourage those types of policies? Because we all know it's happening. And one of the things that Beauty said was, we are employees too, right? If it's happening to you, best be sure that, that you know that it's happening to the rest of the people in your organization. Yeah. So how are policies evolving is my question, and who drives that to say, what are the policies around Zoom, as an example, or no Zoom days? Okay. I have one question, and it's a very open-ended question, Beauty. what was the biggest challenge you've had to deal with as Chief Risk Officer for people in ABSA that you can share, obviously, and what were some of the key actions that you took to resolve that, and as advice for other risk practitioners on this call? The biggest challenge, and please don't be shy. We're all friends here.
Yeah, now you've put me on the spot.
I know.
I think the biggest challenge has been to deal with employee relations matters. That for me has been quite a big challenge, especially involving a woman. I mean, it's a challenge in that sometimes we tend to get biased, unknowingly so. But I don't want to go into the detail because it's work-wise, but I mean, I'll just narrow it to say, employee relations. And it continues to be a challenge, actually, because these things come every day and they come differently. So what I've done, to your second question, how I've dealt with such is to take myself out of the situation, understand, get as much information about the matter, and apply an open, independent mind into such situations. Yeah.
Okay, coded there. Thank you, Beauty. But I mean, it's about being objective and independent, and I think this comes back to. And I had this conversation with a colleague. I'm back at office, by the way, because I struggled to find that work-life balance. So I bumped into a colleague yesterday, and we said, how do you manage performance, right? And you have to use the objective data. What is the output like? Are people delivering results? Yes, we have to have increased empathy during this time, but ultimately the data speaks, and yeah. So it's an increasing challenge. It's that balance, I think, between trust, but also people bearing the responsibility of self-discipline. But okay. Any closing thoughts, Beauty, before we move on to the next session? Please stay for Beauty. We'll save our Q&A panel at the end. And any closing thoughts, Beauty?
My closing thoughts are wishing everyone a healthy stay and take care. COVID is not yet over, and where you want to reach out to me, you can get in touch through AMSA. Where you want to leverage on my expertise, I'm available to help you.
Thank you.
But otherwise, thank you very much for this opportunity. People risk is broad. We could spend the whole day, the whole week talking about it. But I'm just excited that in this short period of time that I was given, I was able to say something, and I hope viewers found it valuable, and our doors are open. And I hope for those that are joining these webinars for the first time, it should not be the last. AMSA has got a number of exciting programs ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Beauty. Sharing with her some of her insights as a HR executive of many years, and talking around attraction, retention, capability building, attracting the right skills. How do we performance manage during this time? How do we manage employee relations? And I think by the end of that discussion, highlighting the importance of wellness programs as we deal with increased challenges around mental health and exhaustion during this time. So thank you, Beauty, for sharing. And Beauty has suggested that you can reach out to her if you need some offline discussions. Thanks, Beauty. Our next speaker is a very talented person in corporate. She has over 17 years of broad spectrum HR experience in operational, senior, and executive management. She's a well-rounded HR expert who's spent a lot of time in the financial services industry, and she's worked for Standard Bank, for the Ekurhuleni Municipal Council, Sanlam, Absa Bank, Deloitte Consulting, and of recent Nedbank. So a very balanced profile. And that speaker is Kosi Mpungose. Welcome, Kosi, to the discussion today. It's such a privilege to have you here. The most important feedback I've gotten about Kosi is not just her well-rounded experience, but her integrity, her high level of integrity in dealing with really complex matters on the HR front. And I think that's why she's left corporate to become an independent, to really bring that depth of insight and integrity and independence to conversations around how we solve for people risks. Kosi, welcome to the discussion. It's such a privilege to have you here. Do you want to do a short intro?
Thank you, Peter. It is a privilege for me to be invited on this platform today. First and foremost, I would like to thank EMSA, Gillian, Roxanne for having invited me again. The last time I engaged with EMSA was in 2019 on a very, very interesting breakfast session where as a speaker, my topic was positioning people risk in 2019.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Needless did I know that there was going to be 2020. And a lot of interesting things happened in 2020, as you can imagine, Peter, you know. So I'm very, very grateful to have been invited in this platform. People risk has always been my passion. Apart from my previous role, having been an HR executive for 12 years, I was blessed to have worked with risk professionals. And as I commonly say, I always say that HR has always been my passion, but risk management became a calling.
Child.
Yeah. So I think also, I mean, to realize that when I saw the profiles of the speakers, I think it's quite a brilliant panel. Having looked at beauty as well, was very, very actually impressed that APSA as an organization seems to be leading in this ground to have a role like beauty, which focuses purely on people risk, just says a lot about how ahead they are as an organization. So I am going to go through some few slides. Perfect. So when I did this, Peter, in 2019, my focus was to position a challenge as well as a problem from a people risk point of view. I think Beauty gave a very beautiful overview in terms of people risk as well as some of the challenges now. My focus with this webinar is a solution to people risk. There's always problems, there's always challenges. 2020 baptized us with the realization of the extent and the depth of certain things that were oversights as well as blind spots. We're now in 2021, also with its own challenges. The challenges are continuing. But what I'll be positioning later with my slides, you'll realize becomes an assisted solution as to how could we bridge the gap from a people risk point of view. When I worked for Nedbank, I've also worked for APSA. Very proud to have worked for APSA as well as Standard Bank. People risk was never a topical thing. And in working for one of the big four banks, the focus on people, on risk in general has always been on your mainstream risks without recognition or realization that most of those risks, the driving force or the root cause of them has always been people risk. So they become the outcome often of the risks that would have occurred from a people front point of view. So on that note, I would like to share my screen.
I'll hand over to Kosi. Thanks, Kosi. We have a half an hour, so we've got until about 2011. Thank you. And Kosi focusing on the solutions. And good to have you here, Kosi. I'll try and field questions in the Q&A. A reminder to please ask your questions through the Q&A function. Thanks, Kosi. Okay. Over to you.
Okay. I hope everybody sees my screen. I will proceed.
Not yet.
What?
Not yet, Kosi.
Not yet.
No.
Okay. Let me go back. Can you see it now?
It's coming, and you can just put it in presentation mode for us.
Okay.
Perfect. It's nice and clear. Thanks, Khosi.
Perfect. So we've talked about people risk. There's been books written on it. We've seen brilliant articles, even from Deloitte, about this whole subject of people risk that has often not received a lot of attention, both from HR practitioners themselves and generally from organizations. And I think most of you would agree with me that post-COVID, we've realized actually the importance and the need of heightening the focus on people risk. The good news is when I did my presentation on this subject in 2019, there was a CEO from Rubuki who I've now partnered with in terms of co-creating a people risk solution that is digital, and I'll take you guys through that at a later stage. So if we look at people risk, why do organizations need people risk? I'm not going to go through all these slides. The main reason is that, as already mentioned also by Beauty as well as yourself, Peter, people risks are by far more complex than any other risks that organizations have gotten accustomed to. People risk become important in that they are ranked the top 5 key risks of concern by most organizations. We also know that often risks that are related to people not only expose organizations to financial losses, but equally to reputational risks. So the two are actually married to the hip. We've also realized and acknowledged that the oversight of not focusing on people risk have actually disabled a lot of leadership, being board members, CEO, as well as executives of organizations, to not be able to take effective decisions, because in order for them to take effective decisions, they require to understand the whole profile of the risks that are facing them from an organizational point of view. There has not been an integrated risk management focus, including combined assurance, that has had a lens on people risk. And hence, we cannot overemphasize at this point in time why organizations need people risk. Having said that, what we've also not been mindful of as professionals is that businesses don't run themselves. People run businesses. People are the one that execute the jobs and responsibilities of functions within organizations. We've seen this, successes of this, equally challenges of this, especially since work has become more remote. The risk that I've picked up that is emanating from working from home, apart from what has already been mentioned also in the Q&As, has been the long hours that now people are expected to work since they're working remotely. But equally so, your own employees that work remotely are your brand ambassadors. So some things with working from home, like the compromised professional etiquette, has also popped up, especially during this time of COVID. There's lack of understanding of people risk that can bring financial loss as well as reputational damage. And often, most organizations don't understand their own people risk maturity level. So with that being said, if you don't understand your people risk maturity level, it becomes very difficult to have the strategy as well as management tools that you require to close whatever blind spots that we may have. Going to the next slide. And this is me talking as an HR practitioner and expert. I'm so hoping that there's HR people who've dialed into this session. But if they are not HR people, this is more a conversation of HR practitioners as well as risk professionals in this room. And I'm hoping by the people that are attending this becomes an opportunity of making sure that we open those doors that have been closed. The first point that I have there is the game of people management is all about risk. For HR practitioners to have thought that HR stands in isolation from risk, it's not something that we can afford to uphold. There's definitely a need of stepping up and embracing risk as core to HR management processes, as well as practices. COVID-19 has exposed the future world of work that we are highly dependent as organizations on knowledge workers. And with the dependency on knowledge workers, certain practices and policies needs to be reviewed, needs to be revamped in line of this. People risk has direct dire consequences, not limited to reputational risk. The list is long, you know. What I've observed also working in organizations is that risk practitioners, internal auditors, as well as HR practitioners don't work collaboratively. In the new world of work, where now we have been faced by COVID, where our future will definitely change compared to where we come from, there needs to be a collaborative synergies of those three functions from an organizational point of view. HR practitioners has a misperception that risk is not their business. Yet an effective HR practitioner has to wear both hats. You have to be you have to wear your risk hat as well as your HR hat at all times. As you can see, I've highlighted that. HR does not often take ownership of risk management, and yet the nature of the function and the role is about risk management. As a result, what we see is underreported at the state of people risk in organizations, and often the mitigation is very reactive, where we know in certain incidents, had there been a risk-based approach in human resources practices, certain things could have been mitigated proactively. HR functions don't seem to have a better grip on people risk management because of that delegated responsibility to risk management. As a result of that as well, the people risk diagnostics are often poor, if non-existent. It is difficult to track some of the issues that are creeping from an organizational point of view. Reporting becomes poor and often opening organizations to risks that could have been avoided. Organizations are unable to have a human people strategies that responds to mitigating insightful risk based on effective diagnostic mechanisms. Often there's a well-embedded, there's not a well-embedded people risk framework and culture, which is integrated in the risk universe of the organization. So with that being said, the game of HR has changed fundamentally post-COVID. It is now about risk. It is now about the game of risk while integrating your HR head in who you are and what you do. So those are the pointers I just wanted to bring to the fore in terms of some of the blind spots that we carried over even post-19. And you would see later on with the slides that I'm going to be presenting that the solution that I'm going to be proposing will seek to address some of these gaps. So, as mentioned, HR does not operate in a vacuum. It has to be part of everything and anything that is organizationally led. And what I'm going to take you through is an integrated GRC solution, which is the integrated governance risk compliance tool. What is beautiful about this tool compared to what we've seen in the past, with this partnership of RibuQ, we have been able to unpack the people risk solution as well as the GRC, so as to ensure that people risk is encompassed in the overall risk universe. So while I discussed in 2019 the what and the positioning of the problem, what I'll be taking you through is the how. And this how, Peter and everybody listening, is quite critical because as an HR professional myself, when we talk about people risk, you know, I remember when those risk practitioners would come to my office, often I would not want to see them, you know, because you know what, these are policemen, they're just gonna be picking on me, picking on holes and gaps and all of that, without realizing actually that the two work hand in hand. So with that being said, what is the people GRC? The people GRC, if I'm to go through that, is that we know that the people GRC is very immature in most organizations. There's often poor oversight experienced by HR professionals, risk professionals, Equally, a poor oversight that does not equip our businesses as well as our executive teams to have insights of what is happening at any given time in most organizations. So with a designed People GRC digitalization of this, I've spent a lot of time with ReviewQ going through end-to-end HR processes from beginning to end. What was beautiful in terms of this project is that it was done with a lens of COVID-19, because in 2020, the whole world was in that space. So what you see in that slide is the different dimensions that the People GRC will assist organizations to diagnose as well as to measure. We measure things like your management of people risk overall. There's various dimensions that are feeding into that dimension, where there's automated questions where organizations can be able to self-assess themselves in order to assess their maturity as is gap. Leadership and culture becomes even more critical. You know, in the olden days, it used to be a nice to have, the Rolls Royce of the importance of leadership and culture. I think in COVID, we've realized that that dimension becomes even more important. We now are more and more in need of leaders and less of managers. The importance of creating the psychological safety by leaders from an organizational point of view is quite critical. Talent attraction, where are your gaps in terms of your processes and practices? You mentioned, Peter, that one of the common lines was talent acquisition and retention by most organizations. So that dimension helps you to unpack your own processes from an organizational point of view, onboarding and induction processes, employee development, which becomes important because now we are looking at digitally savvy employees, issues of inclusivity, remuneration and reward, and of importance, working conditions and working environment. So those are all the facets that the People GRC will unpack and assess at the finger of clicking a button to assist organizations to understand what their SEs gaps from a people risk point of view are. Moving on to the next slide, I've already mentioned that I've partnered with ReviewQ on this, but what is ReviewQ? ReviewQ is an advisory content and technological solution that is provided through a digital solution. It is an integrated GRC solution, not only covering people risk, but all other facets of risks. It is a secure cloud-based solution offering that ensures that organizations are well equipped digitally to assess their own maturity, the SE's picture, with the diagnostics that are already equipped from a system point of view, including using interesting technology like artificial intelligence. We are able to assist organizations to measure their current SE's assessments. That becomes very important because if you don't understand your SE's position as an organization, it then becomes difficult to strategize and to understand where the gaps are. I'm not going to go through all the legs, but out of the SEs, we are able to have a gap audit of where you're sitting in terms of your People GRC. And then with the gap audit, be able to unpack where the gaps are, be able to unpack what the solutions would be in closing and minimizing the gaps. But the beauty of this is that for the first time, and this excites me because, I remember, working for a bank for so many years, when it becomes reporting time, often the quality of the reporting is sometimes a tick box exercise. It lacks depth or insights of what you are reporting on. And there was just this assumption that you must report on employment equity targets, achieving those or not achieving those. There's more to HR, there's more to people risk than what most organizations are currently reporting. However, if you don't have the tools that assist you by your own diagnostics as well as your own gap analysis to assess the maturity of an organization, it becomes difficult to report adequately as well as insightfully on what the profile of the organization is. And that's the beauty of this digitalized solution. With that being said, I've just also print screened an example of how this may look like. This is not a real organization. As you can see, we've just said ABC company. But if I'm an HR practitioner, having bought the license through RibuQ of assisting me to do my own maturity assessment, you would have that as your screen, the maturity and gap audit, because that becomes very, very important. There's a maturity scale that will measure the maturity based on the dimensions that's already been fed by the system behind the scenes. This screen overall shows you, based on how you would have assessed yourself, what is your overall maturity score? And it then still unpacks all those people practice dimensions. So as you can see, how bad or well are you doing against all those dimensions? At the end of the day, you are able to have effective, insightful MI that informs where the risks are, that informs the quality of the discussions as well as decisions around people risk. The next slide is the same. It just shows you those dimensions. You'll be able to easily pick up that, oh, we seem to have more issues from a well-being point of view. Then what becomes the plans in terms of minimizing those gaps so that your blind spot becomes lesser over time. The next slide then shows you, based on those dimensions, you'll see on top working conditions, talent attraction, how are you doing per dimension, and what is your score, where are the glaring areas that requires attention, and then it informs the behavior as well as areas that you need to be attending, be that as an HR practitioner, your risk professionals would be also informed by those insights based on the gap and maturity assessment. And then this just shows the end of the reporting. So in summary, it is all well and good for us to identify and acknowledge the importance of people risk in the new world of work. However, without equipping organizations with tools for their own self-diagnosis, with tools for ensuring that they are proactive in dealing people risk issues instead of the usual fighting fires mode that most of us have come accustomed to, it becomes difficult to now move from problem mode to solution mode. And I'm hoping, if anything, with what I've demonstrated is that people risk should not be complex. There is tools, there is mechanisms that can be entrenched from an organizational point of view to make sure that your HR practitioners are competent as risk professionals in their own right. The reason why there've always been this divorce of HR as well as risk is that HR practitioners generally feel that risk is not their game, but often it comes from fear because they are not well-rounded risk professionals. So with tools like this, you are able to marry and merge the two functions so as to equip organizations in managing their risk, but more so the people risk element, much more better, much more intelligently, much more effective than anything we've seen in the past. And with that being said, I'm happy that I've taken you through these slides just demonstrate as to how it may look like. This is just an annexure showing some of the questions that are built into the system. The beauty also of the system is that per dimension of people risk practices, we have ensured that it aligned to what our South African labor laws expect from us, keying for in terms of leadership as well, issues like organizational corporate governance. So there's interlinkages to ensure that the compliance is rounded and it's sound, and it's not only focused inwardly, but equally externally in terms of the organization being equipped to close and hone on to those gaps. On that note, Peter, I know I might have not taken 30 minutes. My details are available as well from EMSA. I've also left our details of my consulting company, which is AMM HR Consulting, in partnership with RibuQ, who provided this digital solution. It is exciting times It is exciting to see HR becoming digitalized. It is a very good space to be in of equipping HR practitioners in the language as well as the school thought of risk management. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kosi. It's what an interesting tool to enable us to do our jobs better, right? I think it's always useful to have the enabling tools to really help us address complex challenges. And so, Kosi, I'm glad you've left time at the end, because we've got quite a lot of questions. So I'm just going to pose them for you, and then you can just you can try and address some of them. So the first is, Kosi, do you have any ideas on managing social media risk? Employees often take to social media platforms to air their disgruntled issues instead of resolving their issues through the channels available to the organization. Interesting one.
Yeah, that's also actually have been an increasing risk, Peter, and actually been prior to COVID-19. Most of the big organizations, I mean, I know from a banking point of view, there have been social media policies, but it all starts with awareness. It all starts with educating employees about the advantages as well as the disadvantages of social media. We have seen few cases already where some employees have been dismissed by virtue of how they transact from a social media, which has led to reputational risk of organizations. So my advice is that even though there may have been social media policies, how relevant are those policies in 2021? How relevant are they post-COVID-19 when everything is becoming more digital than less digital? Are your employees understanding the usage of social media in a responsible way? Because much as they may transact in their individual personal capacity, your employees always carry the flag of your organization. So it also becomes difficult to consequence manage any transgression or abuse of social media if you don't have easily well-articulated social media policies without using, I know banking, we like to use jargon and complex language and all of that. Simple language, your rights and responsibilities as an employee. This is what as an organization we stand for. This is how you'll be consequence management when you transgress in APCT. So there needs to be a review of that, especially in light of COVID-19. I have seen also when it was lockdown, hard lockdown last year, what was very fascinating and interesting observation was LinkedIn being also a social media, professional social media platform. It started to attract a lot of men who were fishing for ladies, you know, something that is unprofessional given what LinkedIn is all about, you know. So it's educating and creating that awareness, especially now that people are working from home, and especially because social media has become an outlet for most of us to express, to communicate, and to reach out to the greater, bigger world.
Thank you so much, Kosi. Again, around awareness and education, and it becoming an increasingly challenge. I think there's interesting and complex questions here around, and I think these are interrelated. Does this GRC product, and what's nice about this tool is it's a diagnostic, right? So we spoke to Beauty about objective data, independent data, and the tool allows us to do that. But does the GRC product address the work from home scenario as part of working conditions? And it's linked to another question from Ufemia, who's got great questions. Thanks, Ufemia, for keeping them coming through. It goes, current OSH legislation does not release the employee from traditional OHS obligations. Now that people are working remotely, employees really cannot assess or manage safety in their home environments. Effectiveness of OHS measures are dependent on how well employees apply safety and conform with guidance. So I suppose the question is, what are you seeing in this OHS space, and employers almost being released from their responsibilities or not? And does the tool help us do that? Is this tool updated for work from home?
Yeah. I did say that when we designed some of the dimensions from a tool point of view, the advantage was that it was not done in 2019. It was already in 2020. So some of the sub-questions and categories did take care of the working from home aspect. You would have seen that there's a dimension there that talks about work environment as well as work conditions, where we have fed work from home type of issues based on our limited knowledge at the time. It will be interesting to go back to the tool to ensure, given when the timing when we did it versus some of the developments that we started to see, to ensure that it actually does adequately cover the working from home scenario, but it definitely does do that under the working conditions dimension.
Thanks so much, Kosi. Then I see one or two more questions. There was a question from Kathy Sims around Q to Kosi. In the TM and succession space, the talent management and succession space, particularly for the future knowledge workers, where does the risk get reviewed where you have to make decisions around building, buying, or borrowing skills? And again, especially now in this new work from home environment.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, Peter?
Sure. So it's around talent management and succession, particularly for future knowledge workers. Where does the risk get reviewed about where you make the decision to build, buy, or borrow skills? How are we making that decision around the build, borrow, buy conversation as it relates to future knowledge workers?
Yeah. Based on my knowledge, that has been often informed by the nature of the task or the project. And based on the nature of the project and assignment at hand from a work environment, it talks to whether would you need to buy. And buy comes often with a gap of realizing that you have skills that you don't readily have. And also the nature of the project might be short-term in nature, where the practical solution becomes buying. Building comes in effect, where you may need to build a capability internally, but also realizing that the nature of work or assignment would most likely be permanent or be for a long haul from an internal organization point of view. And those are the different hats that organizations need to wear. It talks to the new ways of working, it talks to the flexibility of how you manage your workforce. Not all workforces ought to be permanent, and not all workforces need to be physically situated in a certain spaces. In fact, the trends are showing us that people can work everywhere, anytime, and things are swaying more to buying certain workforces or skills temporarily to achieve certain things, and shrinking your permanent workforce so as to maintain or some of the projects that organizations might have from a long-term point of view. So it's a mixed breed of what you need depending on where the organization may be, but the buying of skills has become increased. I mean, we've seen even in our government the buying of doctors from Cuban. That is a buying mode. We do have our own medical doctors, but because of pressure and certain things that needs to be achieved from a short-term point of view, we have had to outsource and buy those skills temporarily.
It's an important consideration for HR, for leadership, and for risk professionals to support through that journey, right? The build,
That's
borrow,
true.
buy decision in terms of skills, and you're so correct in terms of and one of the questions I think Tamara and Santa will talk about next in the next Q&A session is around the right skills, because the type of skill will depend on whether you build, borrow, or buy. An open-ended sort of space for you. What is the biggest challenge you saw your clients have to deal with, maybe at the start of lockdown, in the middle of lockdown, sort of end of last year, and where we are now? Have you seen the focus change in the people risk dynamic, the biggest challenge that they're dealing with at the start, around November, December, and now sort of at this early in 2021? Yeah.
It's been an interesting time, Peter. What I have observed with some of my clients, especially managers, have been to manage employees remotely. And that talked to our old ways of managing and motivating employees have had to completely, fundamentally change. I have seen often managers that believed in managing people by seeing them physically, struggling with managing during these times of COVID. Because remember, the old school of managing people was a clocking system of you'll be in your desk from 8 to 5. COVID introduced a new element in managing and leading, which says thou shalt trust. So the transition has had to happen of entrusting your employees to do right and minimizing the focus of working hours, but rather focusing on the quality and the output that employees have, allowing the flexibility that comes with it, and trusting that the right thing happens. It has equally created an interesting conversation about what type of employees or team members do you have? Because in COVID times, the importance of managers and leaders having to surround themselves not only with the right skill sets, but the right team members that have their hearts and heads in the right space have become very important, especially when we're now all working remotely. So it's been that delicate transition of the old way of managing and leading, and this new way of leading has definitely required a lot of stepping back and sometimes not being too hands-on, but a lot of mindfulness in ensuring that you are still able to motivate, you are still able to be effective as a leader, and more so support with all of those things happening behind the scenes. So that's been an interesting transition. But the beauty of COVID, I mean, I know that we always talk of COVID in a bad light because bad things have happened with COVID, but equally so great things has happened with COVID. Certain things that we've ignored for so many years because of being in a comfort zone has actually been put on a spotlight in terms of how we lead, how do we create the psychological safety for our own employees, how do we motivate them when everything else around them is falling apart? How do you recognize that this is not a robot that works for your organization? This human being brings the whole package into an employment relationship. So that's been an interesting observation and transition. Some leaders are mastering it, some are still struggling with it, to be honest.
Important observation. Thanks so much, Khosi. I think we're going to leave it there. So, Khosi highlighting, changing leadership style from seeing to trusting, right, to motivating remotely. I think it's the challenge we're all dealing with, and there is a question from someone around how do we performance manage during this time, and maybe if we can use the Q&A function, Khosi, if you could try and help us answer that one. I think it is around different KPIs, right? In part, and KPIs that are motivated by trust, and output is importantly is something you said. So thanks so much, Khosi, for your time, for your contribution, and really for demonstrating to us, that we need to enablers and tools are part of the solution. Thank you, Khosi. Please stay with us. Thanks a lot,
Peter.
Cheers. Good chatting to you, and please use the Q&A function to answer some of these questions. Next up, we have two fantastic speakers from within the Mercer Marsh family, within the Marsh & McLennan family. First, I must introduce Tamara Parker, who's the CEO of Mercer for South Africa. 25 years of experience, in HR leadership, in consulting with Accenture. She just really brings a wealth of knowledge and experience. And really one of my favorite people in the world to listen to because of that varied experience. So thank you to Tamara Parker, CEO of Mercer, for joining us today, and to Santha Naidu, who's also a member of Tamara's team with over 14 years of experience in HR, supporting HR leadership resolve some of their people risk challenges. In particular, she's passionate about HR operating models, and I'm hoping that and how that can enable not just culture, but effective management. And so it's great to have Santha Naidu with us as well, with her wealth of experience in people management and risks. This is a different format. We've got about 35 minutes left. So Santha is going to ask Tamara and I some questions that she's studiously prepped. I'm sure she has a few surprise ones thrown in there. So thanks to Santha. And let me give you a few minutes, Tamara and to Santha, to just introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Peter, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I think, as Peter said, we're all part of the Marsh McLennan family. Santha and I are at Mercer, and Peter at Marsh. We all work very closely with the World Economic Forum in terms of analyzing risks, and of course that includes the people risk part of it. And we're very excited to share with you some of our results from various surveys that we do around the world, our global talent trend survey, for example, and some of our other risk surveys. We'd love to give you some feedback from that, and also our experience and what we're seeing within some of the organizations that we work with. So I think that's what we'd like to cover today.
Thank you, Tamara.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us today. Peter pretty much said everything in a brief summary, I guess. I'm very passionate about human capital and actually helping the HR teams collaborate better with business so that we can move this practice further. So I think just to kick off, the pandemic basically highlighted the importance of human capital, and people are our last competitive advantage. Now, if we look at high people dependent companies, they're actually outpacing the growth of low people dependent companies. And they're 3 times more likely to have a growth rate of 11% or more. Now, using that, and if we go back to the basics, I know we've been talking about a lot of risk and how to address them, how to identify them, and what we can do to mitigate. Let's go back to the basics. And Tamara, this question is for you, and then we'll hand over to Peter. But as a start, how would we define human capital risk?
Thanks, Tiff. I think both Beauty and Kosi have spoken a lot about this, so I'm a bit worried about repeating, but I think the fundamental starting point is that human capital risk is the gap between the capabilities you need to achieve your strategy and the actual capability you have in your organization. And I think when we say it like that, it sounds very simple, right? So, and up until this point, I think a lot of HR professionals have been focusing on attraction and retention, skills development, succession planning, and all of those good things. Obviously, if somebody is not feeling okay, if they are fatigued, I mean, I myself had a massive burnout about 6 years ago, and I completely understand what that feeling is. I wasn't able to work for 8 months. And I wish someone had recognized that in me. So although I might have been capable, or although you might have the best actuary or the best engineers in your business, if they're not feeling well or they're feeling fatigued, that is still a gap in capability because they aren't able to perform. In the same way as if your environment is dangerous somewhere, you know, if people are hanging onto overhead power lines or doing some other terrible things, you know, to keep your employees safe also means that you're ensuring that you have the people that you need. So I think that there's a holistic way of looking at it, but it's as simple as ensuring that you have the right people in order to meet your strategy.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, Peter, you've got a broader view of risk because, I mean, this is your forte. What is your view on human capital risk? Because, like you said, when you started the session, we looked at talent acquisition as a risk, and it's very rarely addressed. But what would be your view holistically on human capital risk?
You know, it's changed over the last year, to Santha. I must admit, you know, it used to be that one line, you know, inability to attract and retain skill. That was the line, and I've realized now during this year that people risks are business risks. It's like the same thing, and I know that sounds twee, but you know, so much of your business, your strategy, your plans are dependent on the people, and what we have seen is that. When it's the risk that generates from your workforce, right? However you define that. Some people call it human resources, some people call it human capital. It's always interesting to me which you call it, but that's a different conversation. But it's the risk that the workforce generate, and there are costs associated with that. There's business interruption associated with that. The risk is actually far more complex than just the attraction and retention, you know, and COVID has proven that to us. So people risk is a business risk, and it has lots of implications on costs, on business interruption in particular, we saw last year. So for me, that sort of sums it up today. I think my view will evolve still.
Thanks, Peter. Now, Tamara, you've interacted with various clients over this really tough period. What are some of the top human capital risks that were identified, and were companies actually able to find the right controls to manage these risks?
So I think some of the risks that we're seeing have just been kind of put in the spotlight, but they're very similar to what they were before COVID. I think the big difference with COVID, and I think Kosi described it very well, and Beauty, is this idea about fatigue. And so our latest survey, our Global Talent Trends, has seen that human capital practitioners or chief HR officers, their main concern last year was fatigue. Right, was fatigue. And I think we've seen lots of various ways to mitigate. So we've seen some organizations are doing special training for managers and leaders to make sure that they can recognize what someone is going through. We speak about leading with empathy. I mean, Mercer always says we're on the intersection of empathy and economics. So it's ensuring that we see every single person as an individual, right? Sometimes we see this massive workforce, but we don't really know what individuals are going through. So it's about being able to find time in your day to have conversations with all your people. We've seen a lot of increase in surveys, although people got fatigued of the surveys themselves. So, I mean, I think we had to worry about that. Obviously, the future of work, or the fourth industrial revolution, is very high up on people's lists. In fact, the workforce is changing. We know that a third of today's jobs are going to disappear by 2030. All right, and what are we doing about that? Because of course we can't simply have a whole lot of people that don't have jobs anymore. And there, I think what really good organizations are doing is they're looking at strategic workforce planning. So they're trying to understand what kind of changes are going to go through, and they've got tools in place that help them to identify the workforces that are going to change, and ensuring that they're focusing their skills and development efforts on those workforces to make sure that they have the insights that they need. I think that someone's written here about the analytics, and I think that is something that good organizations are doing. They're making sure that they are looking for the data that they need to make good decisions. Now, we always talk about, Tasantha at Mercer, we say being able to use data with ethics. Your data is not about being able to kind of spy on people or do those things. Your data is around saying, for example, you might have some wellness benefits or some health benefits within your organization. We want to be able to look at those benefits and be able to see, wow, women aren't using this particular benefit. Do we have benefits that are specific to women's health, and putting those things in place? And then I think what's really important, our Global Talent Trends report covers 54 countries across 6 regions. Now, of those regions, 5 of them had skills development as the most important thing that HR needed to do in 2021. But in Africa, we had reinventing sustainably as our highest area of concern. And I think it kind of goes towards, I think Kosi spoke about reputational risk, for example, and I think it's all in there. It's about ensuring that environmental, social, and governance issues within your organization, ESG, that you've looked at some of those things. It's important for attraction and retention. It's important for the culture of your organization. And it's important from a sustainable point of view, right? Making sure that you're doing those. And then I think, as everyone's mentioned, engagement. Disengaged workers are not able, employees do not give you 100% of their effort and time, right? Engagement during lockdown or engagement in remote working environments is very difficult to understand and to manage. And so I think that a lot of people are talking about that.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I mean, you mentioned culture being a risk. Kosi mentioned it as well. We spoke about talent acquisition being a risk, employee engagement, burnout being a risk. But people risk, apart from safety, was really considered or even identified as a risk. Now, in your experience and exposure with the clients that you're interacting with, has this changed, and why?
I mean, Peter might have to jump in here because he speaks a lot about this, especially in the terms of the safety. I mean, I know, in years gone by, I did quite a few safety culture projects, especially at our big SOEs, where safety was top of mind, of course. I mean, there were actually fatalities and things on site. I mean, that was a big culture project that was run from HR, right? HR has the accountability and responsibility for ensuring some kind of culture in an organization. But I think we've seen skills definitely highlighted. If I think about some of the risk reports we've been through, Peter, in the past couple of months, what we're seeing there is skills coming up quite strongly. and the mitigations around that. I don't know, Peter, if you want to add something.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I think, yeah, so in the discussions we're having with clients, skills obsolescence and the right skills for the future, it all comes up in every conversation almost. You know, in a way, we've made this rapid transition into a work from home. I almost want to call it the fourth industrial revolution. We've all gone online, right? Even, you know, even our retailers, you know, can deliver within 60 minutes now. And so that was good, but we almost had a skill set that was appropriate for up to 2019. And what we've realized is, as the business strategy has shifted, maybe we need different skill sets. And how quickly can you do that? Again, build, buy, borrow decision that we spoke about with Corsi earlier. So skills obsolescence and right skills for the future, I think, is the most topical risk in that people space. The other thing, of course, as risk practitioners and HR, is POPIA, right? And the protection of information, of personal information, has become, and cybersecurity around that risk, around that data. So those two interrelated risks, I think, are now front and center, and that's an elevated risk that we're helping our clients resolve through POPIA readiness. But I mean, I think we all have 6 more weeks before the grace period ends for POPIA. And I hope that big push to update policy, procedure, controls to ensure that we are protecting people's data doesn't end when the grace period ends, and that we continue to focus on people's data as an asset, and so how do we protect that and use it for the right reasons? And I love what you said earlier, Tamara. Use the data with ethics. That's going to be critical, right? But we have a responsibility as a risk community to protect that data. I think that's quite important.
I mean, I think, Peter, it's so interesting when we speak to HR people, and it actually came out in some of our surveys and reports. We speak about skills, and traditionally, it's not HR, right? HR have always known that's competencies around, behaviors plus skills plus knowledge, etc. But I think that what we're seeing more and more from business is that they understand that the top 3 skills that they're looking for going forward are actually mostly about behaviors, right? And they are collaboration, self-management, and the ability to learn. And so we're seeing that coming up as some of the things we're looking for, and those are all sort of attributes around a person. More difficult to test for. And I think, Beauty was talking about how we're recruiting online these days, and we are asking people to do some kind of assessments. So I think it's about everyone ensuring that within those assessments, we are also assessing for the softer skills, as I've mentioned, collaboration, ability to learn, and
self-management.
Yeah.
And so that self-management is critical to this lack of trust. The old management style was I need to see you, I need to kind of squiz past your laptop to see that you're still working, you know what I mean? And it wasn't always conscious, but you could get a feel for whether people were back to engaged, right? But now you don't have that ability, right? And so the ability to self-manage, I love that, Tamara, is something we need to actually actively recruit for.
Yep.
Thanks for that. Now, if we look at the data that from some of our surveys, we've seen that only 2 in 5 HR professionals actually know what skills exist in their organization today. Now, that goes back to the point Tamara made about the importance of collaboration and the importance of collaborating with business, because it's not HR's responsibility to tell the business what skills they'll need for the future. Now, with that said, in a recent conversation with an MD, he referred to his workforce as factors of production. Now, do you believe leadership need to change their priorities from focusing on just the bottom line when they are still highly profitable?
So yes, I do. And I think that many businesses are getting there, right? So if we think about the bottom line or how we contain costs, etc., I think some MDs or some financial people want to be able to see the world in, oh my gosh, how do I cut the costs of all of this? Although they understand that, in fact, and I think both Beauty and Corsi also mentioned this, is that having the right people is, of course, absolutely fundamental to your top line, right? You can't grow a business if you don't have the right people in place. I think that more and more what we're beginning to understand, and I think human capital and HR professionals have a role to play in being able to talk about these things, is I just spoke about the cost of disengagement, right? A disengaged workforce will not get you to where you need to be. An employee, a workforce that is not well, or is dealing with fatigue, that is also that has additional costs. And then we know that there are costs of recruitment. There are the costs of the loss of knowledge when people walk out your door. I think that more and more finance people and more MDs or CEOs are beginning to understand the costs of human capital disengagement and attrition.
Okay. And Peter, what have you seen from your side in terms of just companies looking at the bottom line versus looking at the company holistically and taking people into consideration?
Very short-sighted, and we've got interesting comments coming through on the chat function. Thanks everyone. Akone is saying extremely cold approach. Practice of productivity. This guy needs an attitude change. Absolutely, but it's so short-sighted, and we talk about ESG. The focus on environmental sustainability, that S, right, and governance. And I think we all need to take a much more medium-term view, at least in terms of people. And how they enable our business. What I find if I lose someone within, I have a high performing team, and that means that you lose them every 2 to 3 years. It's kind of just standard, right? And you basically lose capacity, and I'm sounding like a factor of production person, but you lose capacity for 3 to 6 months potentially when you lose staff, and that has a direct impact on top and bottom line for me, right? And so investing the time and the effort in understanding the skills you have, understanding the skills you need, and how to engage your workforce so that they, even when they are with you, they are highly productive. And I'm sounding like that guy now. But
Love it.
It's straight to the bottom line. You know what I mean? If you don't treat people with empathy as individuals with unique needs and challenges, with unique growth ambitions, how much time do we actually spend on the talent mapping and succession plan? How much time do we actually spend on the development plans? That investment in really understanding the journey people want to be on for the rest of their careers. I mean, that's a very long framework, the timeline these days, maybe 5 years. And how can we as a firm partner with them so that it's sort of like we're all winning. A medium-term view, sustainability. I think we've all gotten to the point where we're just trying to survive, and maybe 2020 was about survival, but I'm trying to train myself to come out of that mode now, right? And actually start thinking sustainability. And
I agree. I mean, I think Kosi said two very important things. I think she said, you need to see your employees as people, right? Sometimes they're not machines. They have lives and hearts and minds and all of those kind of things. And I've forgotten the second one. Sorry.
Yeah, empathy. Empathy. Yeah,
and
empathy.
Yeah, exactly. Empathy. There was something else really, but okay,
Okay, just in the interest of time.
Okay,
so, I mean, if we look at culture, and some refer to culture as the tone set on top, and I've read somewhere that culture is the values that employees see on the canteen walls. Is this the right approach? What is Marsh McLennan, Mercer, Marsh Advisory's view on culture itself? So is it something that should be dictated to the organization, or do we involve employees in the way we build this culture within organizations?
So I think definitely from a Mercer point of view, we believe in human-centered development and design, and that means taking all of your employees on a journey. We're very aware that when you do things from the top and try and push it down without some kind of change management approach or without having a voice of employees, you will never get it implemented in your organization, right? So I think it's really important to take employees on a journey. Having said that, leadership do need to set an example, right? You can't expect employees to have some kind of corporate culture that you yourself are not prepared to exhibit and display. I think in the old days, we spoke about this kind of command and control. It comes out of old army type or military style management, and that doesn't exist anymore. Human-centric management means, and I think because he spoke about trust, it's about, you've employed people for a reason because you trust their ability to do things and to really, add to your workforce. So trust them and let them also make decisions. It's about how do you delegate decision-making in some way. And then I think it really is also about, how you manage performance. I saw somebody earlier asked about performance management systems and that sort of thing. We've seen an alarming trend coming out of the US of all kind of applications and tools which kind of track the number of hours at your laptop, or track the apps you're using, or tracking keystrokes. And the worst of all that I've seen is a tag you wear around your neck that kind of tracks all your movements and what you're doing. I don't think that that will build a culture of trust, right? I think that, in fact, that's the opposite of a culture of trust. I think when we think about performance, and I think, Peter, you said it earlier, you know, it's about outcomes. What kind of outcomes are we looking for? And that doesn't mean output necessarily, right? It means, have I achieved the outcomes that I wanted to achieve, regardless of how I get there, right? Or how many hours I take to do it. So I think there's a lot of that. I don't know, Peter, you want to add to that?
No, phenomenal. And this is why we love Tamara Parker. She holds me accountable, right? It's not outputs, Peter, it's outcomes. But in terms of culture, I think this is probably the most difficult thing that I'm struggling with, you know, within our environment. And I'll speak for myself. It's how do you maintain the culture that existed again a year ago, right? What does the new culture look like? How do you onboard new people and graduates or young people in particular who need to be coached, right? And it's not just in terms of improving their skill sets, but you know, you imbibe the culture through that process by sitting next to each other, you know, working through things together. So, but they are building blocks to culture, I think, and I think what's come out of this last year for me is this whole concept of the employee experience. You know, we spent a lot of time as corporate South Africa, you know, trying to work on the customer experience, and that was almost the trending topic 5 or 7 years ago. But you know, we didn't. I don't know if we spent so much time on the employee experience, and that has come up more and more in the last year. And I think if you can map the employee experience, generate the insights, then you know what elements of the culture that needs to be worked on. But it needs to be a bit more scientific, right? People can't pick up the culture by being on the floor.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
I mean, you know, Peter, we use like a really interesting platform called Ramesh, which allows us to really understand what people are feeling. You know, we say you want employees to drive the kind of culture in your organization. So there are tools and ways, even remotely, that we can get a sense of what people are thinking. But I think we've also spoken about employee value propositions during the course of the morning. And what is it about your organization that makes people want to work for you? And I think back in the day, we always thought that was about comp and ben, or, you know, if I pay you enough money, you will stay. It really isn't true. I mean, I've been offered some jobs, one in Saudi, and I said, no, there isn't enough money. I don't want to work in Saudi where women are treated in a particular way. So the thing that we're seeing, the studies show that the reason why people want to work for your organization is your purpose. And everyone needs to live that purpose. And that purpose also needs to be around sustainability. You know, we've got clients even in the fossil fuels business that are looking at their purpose and how they're moving into green energy, etc. If you really truly believe in your organization's purpose, and if the purpose of your organization is to build a better world and a more sustainable world, etc., then you're already starting to create a culture that people can you know, admire. And then I think it also goes with, and I think Kosi also mentioned this in beauty, around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, the kinds of things when we speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion should also be, you know, done remotely. And you know, it's all about, do I feel included? And that's all about human-centric design and a human-centric organization. It doesn't matter how diverse it is, I need to be included.
Okay. Now, HR, the perception out there, and it's been here for years, is that we're always fighting to get a seat at the table. We're always fighting for our voices to be heard at board meetings and so on. But now, if we look at the data again, 1 in 5 employees report experiencing a cultural crisis. Now, should boards discuss culture risk as part of the overall risk process during board meetings, or is this something that we can brush aside as we did with other practices?
No, I mean, I believe that it needs to be something that both boards and executive talk about all the time. And I think it's interesting. I've been watching the chats, and I think there's a lot of talk about culture and what that means. I mean, what I'm loving seeing recently is either the head of HR is called the head of people, or the head of culture, or the chief culture person. I'm really enjoying the changes of title, because that's really what it is, right? Your role as the head of HR is really to manage the culture and to ensure that it becomes such an important thing that it's sitting at board. We need to convince, either as risk people or as HR people, we really need to be able to have a business case that proves to boards and executives that culture drives success, right? We know that culture and engagement drive success. So it's about having that conversation and ensuring that we can quantify it, qualify it, and get it into a board meeting.
And Peter, how easy or difficult will it be for human capital, or the head of people, the head of culture, to actually get this tabled at board discussions?
It's going to be incredibly difficult without the data. You know, we really must become more proficient at measuring, you know, employee engagement, you know, drivers of culture. You know, how are we measuring it to show differences? And only when, some is my feeling, and this is my view, it's like only when people see the data points, you know, do they believe that they need to take action or not, right? And so we must become better at tracking, you know, the key drivers of engagement, right? I think we've spoken a lot about engagement today,
Yes.
and for the risk professionals to really help using the tools, you know, using identifying key risk indicators is something we're very good at as a risk community. You know, what are the key risk indicators around people risk, and measuring those, tabling those, and I the discussion at board level very easily. But without the data, it feels like one of those pie in the sky discussions, right?
I agree. Yeah, I agree, because I mean, we speak about often the conflict between human capital and sort of finance people, or you know, sometimes there's a very short-term view of the world, as you were saying, Peter, from a finance team, right? They want to see quarterly results or monthly results. And from a human capital point of view, we always have a long-term agenda, right? You can't build skills in a quarter. You can't change culture in a quarter. You can't do any of these things on a quarterly basis, right? We have long-term strategies and plans. And so I think data is very important. I've learned, you know, when I go to exec meetings or when I sit with boards, that I need to have a business case for people, which shows a long-term return on investment. I hate these terms, right? They don't sit well with human capital people, but I think it also goes more, and, you know, Tasanta was talking about HR transformation. I mean, HR as a community also needs to see itself very differently. And I think what we're seeing more and more is that the kind of people that are joining human capital communities within businesses are engineers and actuaries and MBA grads and these kind of people, because I think it's important to be able to marry, you know, your love for people and your wishes for you know, engaged communities at work with the financial and economic understanding of business, like really truly understanding business. I think that would be our success.
Okay.
I'm going to add one point there. Sorry,
Sure,
Tasanta.
Peter. No, go ahead.
Tamara said create the business case, you know, for people. And on the chat, there's a Daniela Moritz posted a comment which was like create an impactful people strategy. You know, there's something there in terms of, because the finance people have their plan, I can promise you, right? You know, but you know, as a people community, you know, are we equally adept at crafting the value proposition for the longer term people journey?
Okay. And if we look at things like ESG, which Tamara mentioned earlier, if we look at people management in general, HR held a disproportionate amount of the responsibility for these factors. Now, if we look at people risk holistically, who is responsible for this? Is it HR?
You know what I love, Tess, is like whenever we have these questions, people look in, especially HR, right? They kind of scratch around and say, I need to build a job. I need to create a job and employ somebody, right? Like that always feels like the answer to these things, but it really isn't. We spoke earlier about collaboration and how key a skill collaboration is into our future, especially virtual collaboration. And I think instead of building jobs, we need to be building collaboration forums, right? This is so multifaceted. You need to have finance and risk and your corporate real estate people who provide the environment that we work in, and you know, to have a cross-functional forum that can holistically discuss these risks, right? And together create these packs that go to boards or that go to executives, showing that we understand that there's not one problem with one solution. solution. There's a variety of risks with multiple mitigations that need to be developed.
Okay. Peter, do you want to add anything to that?
I think in this changing world, and I thought this question, line management have a massive responsibility to partner with this collaboration forum to bring up the issues, identify the pain points, really focus on what employees are going through. As Beauty mentioned, we are employees too, right? But as line, I think we have an incredibly important role. And again, I spoke about it earlier. Are you doing talent mapping? Are you doing succession planning? Are you overworking your staff, right? Are you seeing emails coming through at 12 at night or on a Sunday morning and doing nothing, right? Yes, there are people mandated with a specific function, maybe chief of HR, people, culture, whatever you want to call it. But as line managers, we also have an increasing responsibility to feed that through and to help change policy ultimately for me as a risk practitioner. How do we get that to change policy, right, on top of the collaboration?
Thanks, Peter. And I'm just cognizant of time. So
Sure.
I think
No?
just in closing, and apologies if we've run a little over, I think just in closing, Tamara, what are leading companies doing to mitigate human capital risk?
So I think we've spoken about some of these already, so I'll be quick. I think, first of all, the first thing is about collaboration. Those organizations that do have these collaborative forums are better at picking up what some of those risks might be and finding holistic, innovative solutions to them. And then I think we said earlier, leading with empathy, being human-centric, making sure that you understand and you're getting the voice of employees. It's no good that we solve things from line managers only or from executives only. We really need to understand what people want, making sure that our HR is transformed in some way to be able to operate at a different level and be able to recognize these things, I think are very important in terms of mitigation.
Thanks, Tamara. Peter, any closing points in terms of how we can?
I think that we're talking about it, right? Let's talk about people risk. And we've said that in many ways today. Beauty called it awareness, and of course, you called it education. But we need to start having the conversation as we're doing today, right, about the challenges that we're facing. And then the forums that Tamara spoke about are what's going to help us get, and that I made notes, the voice of the employees. How do we capture the voice of the employee? I think that's critical to addressing and mitigating people risk.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter and Tamara, and thanks everyone. If you have questions, please just pop them in the chat, but I believe that Peter has a Q&A session right now.
Yes, thank you so much to Santha and Tamara for sharing your insights from Mercer, the world's largest people consulting business, people health wealth, and bringing all those years of experience to the table. I'm going to shift hats quickly.
Okay, I just want to say goodbye, everyone.
Yes.
I'm actually on leave, and I'm going to leave you now. Thank you very much. It was lovely to be here and to meet everyone and to listen also to Kosi and Beauty. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Tomorrow, keep well, travel safe. Cool. So I'm shifting hats. Thank you to Santha. Back to Q&A. So we've got about another half an hour to really to handle any questions, and I'm going to ask the panelists to come back online. So Beauty and Kosi, and to Santha, if you would also please to videos on maybe, and let's try and tackle some of the questions we're seeing in the Q&A function, if that's okay with you. I think some have been answered. And I'm just going to throw these out there. And the first one is with business shifting to remote work models and reducing office space, are we allowed to change recruitment strategies and make suitable work from home capability a qualifying criteria for new recruits? Or can this be regarded as discrimination, especially for call centers, etc., given the current economic conditions? So should being able to work from home be a qualifying criteria, and is that discrimination?
So Peter, if I can just answer,
Yeah.
sorry, Kosi, I saw your hand up. I'll just chip in quickly. I think there's no right or wrong answer because there's no one size fits all. So the organization, as an organization, you need to understand what works best for your workforce. So if working from home is an option for your employees, the organization has a responsibility to enable employees to be able to work from home efficiently and effectively without impacting delivery or outcomes, as we said earlier. So I think there is no right or wrong answer. It was the same with the performance management models. I know that was one of the questions. There's multiple performance management models and frameworks out there, but it's understanding what works well for your workforce. And we're all on different journeys, different levels of maturity. So implementing something that your organization is not ready for will not work. And some of the data we've seen from our global talent trends is that organizations lost $900 billion on digital transformation because they weren't implemented correctly. The workforce didn't buy into it. So it's understanding and taking your employees along the journey. So rather doing things with them rather than to them.
Thanks to Santha. Kosi, did you want to weigh in on that as well? You're on mute still, Kosi.
There you go. Tasantha hit it on the nail. But what I would like to add over and above what she said is, remember when I talked about enabling and trust. One of the things also that we've picked up with working remotely is understanding your workforce at an individual basis. A paintbrush approach of everybody working from home doesn't in all times work. There's employees from a resourcing point of view and the home environment point of view don't even have a table to work in. So it's all those sensitivities that you need to work with, especially in a South African context. It's the sensitivities as to how do you enable, equip, but also opening the door for those that are quite comfortable to work back in the office. So there's no right and wrong based on what Tasantha says, but there's intricacies as well as certain sensitivities that line managers need to work with. So it goes back to, do you know your people as a leader?
Thanks, Kosi. Thanks, Tasantha. Yeah, so the key word coming through there, enabling, right? Enabling based on individual needs. Unfortunately, there's no brushstroke. We, approach that works for everyone, and so it rests with line manager or divisional management to say, for our call center, what makes sense, for our knowledge-based workers, what makes sense, and then encouraging the right behaviors. And we spoke about behaviors earlier. Beauty, you come off mute. I wanted to check in with you. Did you want to add?
Yes, I just wanted to add that the current ways of working has actually taught organizations to look beyond profit and to actually value their people as the most important assets in the organization. Thank you.
Excellent point. Back to the ESG discussion and that sustainability, that longer, medium to long-term view. An interesting question from Daniela Moretz. What are your thoughts on addressing the digital divide at company level, but also on a national level, to promote fairness and enabling employers to work from home? Not everyone has Wi-Fi and or data. We've kind of touched on it, but what are your thoughts on this digital divide that's kind of emerged? Beauty, do you want to start us off?
Yes, I think in my earlier remarks, I did allude to the changes that, are taking place in organizations, and a comment earlier raised, I think it was by Kosi, I think it was Kosi, that the organizations are at different levels of maturity. So one thing that we've got to understand is the cost base as well. It is easier to say that they need to provide and enable the workforce, but does that company have the capacity in terms of resources to buy a laptop for each and everyone? I think that, having been said, has actually led some companies to see what workforce can work from home and the rest in the office, so that to balance that, other than saying everyone at home, 10,000 laptops, some people are employing 35,000 people. And it's not possible. So I think just balancing and seeing how can they accommodate for those skills that work from home in terms of providing the right tools.
Fantastic. Well summarized. Different levels of maturity, different resources that the company has to be able to or not be able to enable, I will just say, unless one of the other speakers wants to jump in, that one of the key thoughts from the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, which we released in January as March, was around the growing digital divide, right? And so we used to speak about inequality, from a financial resources perspective. There's now an emerging inequality as well from an access to Wi-Fi and data, and how we as a country, as organizations, are going to tackle that challenge is going to be very interesting as a mega trend, as almost the next mega trend, right? Dealing with this digital inequality is something we all need to be thinking about in our individual capacities. To Santa.
And Peter, if I can just add to that, because the pandemic, like we already knew it as a country, but it highlighted the societal divide. So it wasn't just organizations. If we look at education, lots of kids were impacted because they didn't have the digital infrastructure to carry on with online learning. So as a country, we need to do better. We need to understand how we can help the country move forward and not just individuals. And that goes back to the whole ESG point of, it's not just about shareholder value, it's about all stakeholders. So the people in your organizations, your suppliers, your communities, it's looking broader than just within and creating shareholder value. We've moved away from that now, I would like to think.
Yeah, thanks to Santa. Okay, thank you. Interesting question from Preeta Sufo. How does one identify the early symptoms of burnout in an employee? What are the signs we need to look out for? I open up this discussion to anyone. Kosi.
Yeah, Peter, burnout. And I raise my hand because it's an issue very close to my heart. And it's an issue that definitely has been observed, especially now with remote working. I think we've all alluded to that, what has come and the unintended consequence of working from home has been increased expectations and often unfair expectations on employees. It is almost like, from a leadership and organization point of view, the trade-off that employees have had to take has been, because now I can work from home, the trade-off is I have to sell my soul in exchange of working prolonged hours, and leaders not being mindful of people's families. I mean, you see with emails, meetings that are happening post-working hours. So it is rather a regressive development because prior to COVID-19, the issue of work-life balance was very topical. But what COVID has done is that it has taken the very same issue that was addressed and that we're already progressive with. So the first signs of employee burnout as a leader that is intuitive with your employees becomes the amount of sick leave. Becomes when the quality of work deteriorates. You can pick up that this person is not fully into their mental capacities. Becomes disengagement. And even though we connect remotely, you do pick up when somebody is not part of the team or not contributing as much as they ought to, even if it's their subject matter, so to speak. So I think it's something that I do think it needs to be discussed by various committees in most organizations, that we have started also to see organizations becoming extremely insensitive to employees, almost like, the penalty of working from home is that we have the right to call you at 8 o'clock until 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock. And I'm saying it because I've got a younger sister going through that as we speak, and the insensitivity that came from the leader in working with her has been something very, very shocking, So it's not happening in one organization, but it's definitely on an increase, and it's worrying that our employees are not getting the support that they need. It's like we demand more from them, and it comes at an exchange of them having to sell the fact that they are mothers and fathers over and above being employees.
Very passionate tea there. Thank you, Kosi. highlighting amount of sick leave, and I mean, it's such that I kind of went aha when you said that, because I've noticed that from one of my employees in particular, and I did think today, I think this deserves a phone call, right? Because it's deserves a phone call at least, and back to line and your responsibility. The quality of work suffering, I think we see that, and disengagement. Thanks, Corsi. Beauty, you've come up with me. Please jump in.
Yes, Corsi is spot on actually. And I just wanted to add that also anger and irritation. When you speak to colleagues that are burnt out, there is just that anger. Any small thing drives them out of, they react quite angry. And it's not the intention, but because they are taking on, so the brain just becomes tired. And sometimes, without, any intention to react the way they do, they react angrily. And I feel as risk practitioners, we have a huge responsibility to make sure organizations shift their culture as the ways of work are shifting. Because we can't just sit back. We need to make sure that the leadership is accountable. We need to call these things out, because just watching and listening to me does not add value. We need to call them out. That's why we are risk practitioners. And sometimes colleagues some are too afraid, like I said earlier on, to put in sick leave. But once we hear the noises, it doesn't have to be 50 people. One is too many. Once we hear that, we have to make that noise with the leadership. I mean, for me, that's one of the things that I normally talk about on my list when I'm discussing with leadership, but more so what is being done about it. And whatever is being done to remediate must be monitored and it must be seen to be working. It's not just knowing what is the problem and writing the problem. No, it must be put in practice so that we actually are supporting this shift and ways of work. Thanks.
Thank you, Beauty. Samantha.
And Peter, if I can just add to that, like if we look at unpaid care work, when we went into level 5 lockdown, you had parents, caregivers having to provide full unpaid care work while still having to complete their jobs. And this wasn't necessarily taken into consideration. And another thing lots of companies experienced was virtual absenteeism. So we're not saying micromanage employees like for the 8 or 9 hours that they're employed for in the day, but virtual absenteeism, it was never something we took into consideration, so we didn't know how to manage it, and that's something as well that companies need to look at. The last point I wanted to make with burnout is when we did engagement surveys traditionally, a lot of companies did it as a tick box exercise. So they'd get the results, put it aside, do it again next year, percentage went up, great, excellent, we're improved. But employees are actually telling you stuff in those surveys, and very few companies took actions from those outputs. So I guess it's a case of starting to listen to employees more, because we were never really listening. We just sort of heard, but we didn't listen. So yeah, just my 2 cents on that.
Corsi, did you want to add? I see you're smiling far too broadly there.
I'm just amused. Yeah, I know because yes, brilliant surveys, but no action.
Agreed. Sharon on the comment saying toxic environments, monitor your staff turnover rates. One company she worked at had a 33.3% per annum staff turnover. In effect, they were turning over their staff every 3 years. Speaks to a culture and a lack of leadership, again, to listen, what we spoke about, the voice of the employee, and then Beauty said to monitor and to be seen to be taking action and to be seen to be taking action equally.
And Peter, I think it's a tricky one, right? Because we spoke about HR for HR, and I know that question came out a lot. HR were expected to take care of employees, but who was taking care of HR? And it's the same, and it's the same with line management and leadership, right? Because they're expected to take care of employees, but who's taking care of them at the same time? So it's a tricky situation to be in. I don't have the answer. I don't know if Beauty and Corsi do, but it's taking the whole organization along the journey and just not having, because they're not our parents, right? Then as much as they are responsible, they also need assistance in that sense. So yeah.
Wow, thanks to Santa. Yeah, Kathy Sims raised that issue. She said, she's seeing HR departments at burnout, and she works for SAGIA, which is the Graduate Employee Association. And so she sees, lots of HR professionals and they're at burnout and line management. I think also something that I thought about, I saw my leave days the other day and kind of got a fright. I was like, how do I have that much leave days? It was like, oh, I'm not taking leave. And so another thing to look out for, some companies have that mandatory policy where you have to take leave every 10 days of leave once a year, whatever. That is there for a reason as well, right? Yes, it's to make sure that you're away for fraud. I think that's kind of one of the reasons, but it's also that you have a proper break where you cut off for a significant amount of time to really, so watch leave days as well. I think escalate. And again, we worry about it because the leave provision is growing, but actually that's only a small part of the reason. It should be about protecting mental health. And yeah.
And Peter, Sharon made a comment with regards to leading employer, and we have had this conversation many times with employees themselves. So I'm not bad-mouthing the initiative when companies do get rated top employer, but that's not coming from the employee. That's based on policies and practices that are in the organization. How it's received is a whole different conversation.
Okay. Thanks, Susanna. I'm going to give us 9 more minutes or so we end at 12. I'm mindful that Zoom fatigue is a thing. I think one of the important questions is from Prudence. I've got 2 more questions really. How do you manage poor performance for an employee who works from home? I think that managing poor performance is something we're all grappling with, because we are trying to have empathy. We are trying to think about all of these scenarios, but at there are still instances of poor performance, right? So I'm going to turn this over to the panel to jump in. How do we manage poor performance during this time?
Can I jump in?
Sure, please.
It's gonna go back to People Management 101. It's gonna go back to the basics that most of us have had to learn. It requires higher levels of humanity than of management. What has always been a known gap in a lot of managers, and I'm talking that as an HR person, has their inability to have frank conversations. And often things are avoided for a prolonged period of time until the situation becomes too worse or too dire. Often performance management, or what we used to call PCP, performance corrective processes, could have been avoided had there been some frankness, especially from a line management side. You don't know who are your stars and your people that needs a bit of support. You manage them differently, like being a mother. That is why us as women, we become great leaders, because you use that same approach, even from a leading point of view, of understanding the uniqueness of each of your employees. But it's frankness, if you feel from a digital point of view, you are not able to get through and penetrate the soul, try and engage meeting them physically, but try to solve from their perspective than from a performance gap point of view. Often when you tap into the personal perspective of whatever else is going on, it's easier to solve from a work performance gap perspective. So it's listening than imposing solutions without actually understanding what the bigger picture is at play that may have impacted the performance.
Thanks, Corsi. Yeah, frank, courageous conversations is what they call it, in some instances. Beauty?
Yeah, thanks. To add to what Corsi has said, I also think that understanding the life cycle of that colleague. One, do we constantly engage with them? Because sometimes managers tend to wait for the last minute when it's a performance cycle review. If they're performing poorly, do we know why? Have we set the right objectives or deliverables for them? What mechanism do we have in place to help them improve? Because you can't say to someone who doesn't have a laptop or a phone or anything, expect them to deliver, to do minutes if they're secretarial and they have nothing. So how we manage them will also depend on what tools the organization has set in place. Exit should be the last thing, but to be able to develop them, to understand why are they in that situation, and try to maybe upskill them if that is needed, train them, expose them, or maybe move them into another department. You could find that you have a lawyer who's a tailor, and when they're a tailor, they are not performing optimally. So it's understanding all those dynamics and being able to say, okay, we think, Peter, in this place, in this department, maybe if we move you to department B, you might actually utilize your skill better. Because it's not always that they are in that department and that's why they're performing poorly. No, it's understanding the dynamics, but nurturing them and helping them to improve. The ultimate goal is to ensure that they have improved. Set a program and a plan in place. You agree deliverables to say, okay, in month 1 to 3, this is what you're expected to do. And this is how I, the manager, is going to help you because they need the support. The fact that they're performing poorly, you don't expect them to go on again on their own. You must be there to support them. The line managers must be there for their people, even in difficult times. I'm sure if they can't get them on a laptop to be on Zoom, the phones are enabled, these Android phones and smartphones, you can speak to them still on the phone, but communicating with them, understanding them, and monitoring and managing them in that process. Thanks.
Thanks, Beauty. So I am hearing ongoing conversations and understanding, where the employee is in the employee life cycle, right? The journey with the firm. Okay, I've got one more, and it's a final question. And I'm mindful, everyone, that not all of them have been answered. It was around what can organizations do to ensure that employees return to work? I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to ask everyone to jump in on this one. What can organizations do to ensure that employees return to work? And please don't say it depends, right? Like let's get your best advice, please.
Can I go for it first?
Sure. Thanks, Beauty.
Enhance their employee value proposition.
What does that mean?
I end there.
No, Beauty, a little bit more.
In ensuring that the value proposition attracts and makes them want to stay for that organization. I mean, time and again, we want to think that improving the EVP is around monetary benefits. No, it's not. So we could have deliberate interventions, maybe that allows for, the blind spots to be catered for. For instance, we can say, okay, all employees with children, especially the mothers, you must start work at 10 o'clock. How does that sound? Don't you think your colleagues, you would attract and retain? So making those deliberate hard moves that will make people want to stay. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm glad I asked for a bit more. Thanks, Beauty. So enhance your employee value proposition by making deliberative efforts, taking deliberative action to target specific almost demographics within your employee profile or population is a fantastic point. Corsi?
I think Beauty has said a mouthful now. I don't know what else to say, but it has to be deliberate. One thing that we've definitely picked up with COVID-19 is that our ways of work is going to have to change. Perhaps we might have situations where some people will be more comfortable to still continue to have an arrangement of working from home and probably have a day or two to come back to the office space. So it's not so much of what is impossible to deliberately do, but it's more the required mindset shift in terms of managing and leading, And also, while we're doing that, Peter, is we also need to be very careful about creating the impression of employers having to have the duty to give, you know. It has to be a two-way stream, both from an employer as well as an employee point of view, you know. As much as I can work around you and with you, you also need to come to the party so that we can make this relationship a win-win and work, you know. And I know a lot of things from an organizational point of view are leader-led, and it looks like the onus only lies with the leaders. But it's a risk and responsibility on all parties, isn't it? So if you want to work from home, what are some of the giveaways that you are willing to do to make this work? And I will also enable ABC for you. So how are we going to co-create those relationships better, differently, flexible, to make sure that no one in that value chain suffers or is disadvantaged?
Agreed. More equity, right? So I think it's
sorry, Peter. I like the points that Kosi is raising here. I mean, it's about responsibility and ownership.
Yep.
So we are empowered to work from home, but we have to be responsible and we have to own our actions. And much as we've highlighted people risk, there's some good aspects that have come out, for instance, in the current ways of work. As an example, some of us never knew how to use Teams, but the work from home has actually helped and empowered us to learn how to use Teams. So it's two ways. I do agree with that. Ownership, responsibility on the part of the employees as well. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Beauty. To Santha.
I think Beauty and Kosi have basically said everything. I think just one point to add is in terms of safety, because like we are where we are right now. So it's not a case of, okay, I want everyone to come back to the office. People have to go home to other people. So it's also taking that into consideration when we say, let's go back. Younger generations prefer to work collaboratively at the office, whereas others don't. So it's understanding, listening, and listening with empathy, and then taking it from there, essentially.
Thank you so much to Santha, highlighting safety remaining the first priority. And I think throughout this discussion, I think the concept of psychological safety as well. It's been a phenomenal learning experience.
Sorry, Peter, before you close, I see you are closing. I think one aspect that we need to consider, the work dynamics now, especially for the leaders, managing from afar, but trusting our people. Thank you.
That was going to be my closing thought. So thank you, Beauty. It was, I think that the highlight of the conversation for me was, and I do believe it was a learning moment for me, it's balancing that trust with, the employee's ability to manage self, right? And I always think about our constitution. When we got our brand new constitution in 1996, it was all about your rights but your responsibilities, and how do we balance those two? And Kosi in particular mentioning it's a two-way street. As a risk community, I think the onus falls on us now that we are more aware, hopefully after this session, about some of the complexities around people risk, to challenge the status quo. As Beauty said earlier, take the discussion to the risk committee, take it to board, have the data, but I think we have a lot of work to do in this space. So I believe today is opening up the conversation, but I'm sure we need follow-up conversations around risk. And let's see how we use this annual conference in September, October usually, to almost tackle people risk as a stream. I'm not sitting on that committee, but I think there's a lot more to unpack, and some of the questions again haven't been answered, but hopefully this is a starting point that will jog your memory. We will try to answer some of these questions. The video will be available shortly, I'm told by Roxanne and the UMSA team. So please do share that link and rewatch if there's something that you need to remind yourself of. The annual UMSA conference is on the 29th to the 30th of September, says Roxanne in the chat. So let's continue the conversation. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm very grateful to all our panelists today for bringing their wealth and depth of experience to the conversation. Go well and enjoy what's left of the week, and we'll be having more people risk conversations in the future, I'm sure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much to everyone. We are humbled, and thank you. Have a great day.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Keep well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
fish.